the pencil trembled slightly, a furtive tremor, as Unifizia Vera Burckhardt etched words into his hidden diary on June 4th, 1943. He was on a train rumbling through Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas, but his mind wrestled with a reality that defied every fiber of his Nazi-indoctrinated being. "The Americans must be lying to us," he wrote, the ink bleeding slightly with the urgency of his doubt. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts. His words, if discovered by his own officers, would have earned him solitary confinement. A cruel irony given the intellectual isolation he now felt. Through the grimy train window, Burckhardt had just witnessed an impossible contradiction. It was 10 at night, yet electric lights blazed from every farmhouse, every street corner, every shop window. An endless constellation of electricity stretched across the vast, dark Texas plains. It was a sight that tore through 3 years of carefully constructed Nazi propaganda like a lightning bolt. In the Reich, blackout regulations had plunged Germany into a deliberate darkness since 1940, a grim necessity of war. Even before the conflict, rural electrification barely touched 20% of German farms. Yet here, in what Nazi ideologues had contemptuously dismissed as a decadent, collapsing America, electricity flowed with the effortless ubiquity of water. It wasn't a luxury. It was the standard, a fundamental amenity of daily life, baffling to men who had been taught to despise and underestimate this nation. As the train pulled into Mexia, 1,150 veterans of Erwin Rommel's legendary Africa Corps stepped down. Their feet, accustomed to the gritty sands of North Africa and the harsh realities of a continent at war, now met the solid ground of a nation they had only known through the distorted lens of their regime's lies. The train itself was another shock. Not the cramped, dehumanizing cattle cars or freight wagons they might have expected, or indeed the infamous 40 and 8 wagons that carried their own troops across Europe, but cushioned Pullman coaches, complete with dining services and sleeping berths. This wasn't the transport of defeated enemies. It was the comfortable journey of well-cared-for travelers. The entire population of Mexia, curious and perhaps a little apprehensive, had turned out to witness their arrival. What none of these German soldiers knew, as they blinked in the unaccustomed brightness of the Texan night, was that this moment would not merely mark their imprisonment, but trigger the most profound psychological transformation in modern prisoner-of-war history. It was the beginning of a systematic demolition of Nazi ideology, executed not through direct confrontation or explicit re-education, but through the sheer, undeniable display of American industrial capacity, and an abundance they simply couldn't reconcile with their preconceived notions. The mathematics of Allied victory, it turned out, were not being written solely in battle plans, in strategic maneuvers on desert battlefields, or through air superiority. They were being tabulated in production statistics, in the ceaseless hum of factories and the silent glow of electric lights, numbers that would soon shatter every assumption these soldiers carried about their enemies, their homeland, and the righteousness of their cause. The psychological collapse, a slow-burn ideological implosion, had quietly begun on May 13, 1943, thousands of miles away in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, Rommel's replacement, had surrendered, along with a staggering 250,000 German and Italian soldiers. The exact numbers varied, as scattered units continued to give up over several days, but the sheer scale of the capitulation was undeniable. The Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt, who had earned the grudging if resentful respect of Field Marshal Montgomery himself, were suddenly prisoners. Among them was Hetman Friedrich Radke, a distinguished soldier, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, a veteran of the swift and brutal French campaign, and wounded twice in the unforgiving North African theater. His diary, a treasure trove of raw, unfiltered observations discovered decades later in the National Archives, would provide historians with the most detailed and intimate account of the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. It was a unique, inadvertent experiment in ideological deprogramming, played out in the hearts and minds of men far from home. The journey from military defeat to a profound personal and ideological revelation began, for many, in the bustling, makeshift camps of the port of Oran, Algeria. As Radke and approximately 30,000 other prisoners waited in the sweltering heat for transport ships, American efficiency was already beginning to chip away at their deeply ingrained preconceptions. They had been told America was disorganized, soft, and incapable of sustained effort. Yet what they saw contradicted this narrative. The U.S. Army processed thousands of prisoners daily with an organizational precision that frankly exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had achieved, even at the zenith of its power. Identity cards were photographed and meticulously filed. Medical examinations were swiftly completed. Inoculations were administered with almost industrial speed. And, perhaps most surprisingly, their Geneva Convention rights were explained in fluent German by American officers who had been specifically trained for this delicate, complex moment. This wasn't chaos. It was a well-oiled machine, utterly confounding for men accustomed to the rigid but often ponderous bureaucracy of their own military. But the first real, visceral shock, the one that hit them with the force of a physical blow, came with the food. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, captured with the elite 21st Panzer Division, vividly recounted this experience in a letter to his mother 8 months later, a document that perfectly captured the profound disbelief. In the cage at Oran, while we waited for ships, he wrote, still astonished, the Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. His words painted a picture of luxury in captivity. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. The immediate, instinctive reaction among the prisoners, forged in the crucible of propaganda, was cynical skepticism. We thought it was propaganda, Müller admitted, that they were trying to impress us. It was inconceivable that such fare could be standard. The truly staggering realization dawned on them slowly, a creeping dread for their own nation's reality. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration. This wasn't a special effort for prisoners. This was just how American soldiers ate, day in and day out. The sheer volume and quality of this standard ration exposed a chasm between the propaganda of scarcity they had been fed and the undeniable reality of American abundance. It wasn't just food. It was a symbol of a nation so rich in resources that it could afford to feed its enemies better than Germany fed its own fighting men. The ships that would carry them across the vast expanse of the Atlantic were, in themselves, profound and irrefutable monuments to American industrial capacity. These were the legendary Liberty ships, symbols of a nation capable of unimaginable feats of production. The SS Robert E. Peary, for example, had been constructed in a mind-boggling 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes at the Kaiser shipyards in Richmond, California. This astonishing fact, if the Germans had known it at the time, would have been immediately dismissed as outrageously impossible propaganda. Yet it was true. These utilitarian vessels, churned out at a phenomenal rate of 3 per day at the peak of production, were returning from delivering vital supplies to the European theater. Rather than sail back empty, a waste of precious cargo space, they were repurposed to carry human cargo, ferrying up to 30,000 German and Axis prisoners of war per month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 provided the second and arguably more insidious phase of their psychological demolition. Confined within these rapidly built behemoths, with little to do but observe and reflect, the prisoners began to truly internalize the scale of American power. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division, a meticulous observer, kept a detailed account that survived in letters to his family after his eventual repatriation. His observations from the ship were particularly damning for the Nazi narrative. He noted, with a mixture of disbelief and growing despair, that the ship's crew disposed of more food waste each day than his entire company had received in weekly rations during the final, desperate months in Africa. The American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk that had sat too long. Zimmermann wrote, the words almost echoing his stunned incredulity. And they did this openly, without thought, not to mock us, but because to them this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless. This wasn't just about food. It was a raw, unfiltered display of unbridled abundance, a stark and brutal contrast to the rationing, deprivation, and constant struggle for sustenance that defined life in wartime Germany. The casualness of the waste spoke volumes about a nation operating on an entirely different plane of material reality. The ships themselves, more than mere transports, became floating classrooms in American power. Prisoners, engaging in hushed conversations with the talkative American guards, who seemed eager to boast about their country's might, discovered that the very vessel carrying them was just one of 2,110 Liberty ships that would be constructed during the war. Each one, they learned, required an astounding 250,000 parts, assembled from components manufactured in 32 different states across the vast American continent. The engines, a marvel of engineering, were built in 3 separate factories, each producing 900 horsepower cylinders that were then assembled in ports that had barely existed 2 years earlier. This distributed, rapid, and immense production capability was an utterly alien concept to the centralized, often bottlenecked German industrial system. It was a paradigm shift in understanding what an economy could achieve when fully mobilized. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, whose aristocratic Prussian family had served in every German war since Frederick the Great, brought a particularly acute strategic mind to his observations. He would later write in his memoirs with a chilling clarity about a moment that crystallized his growing fear for Germany's fate. As our ship approached the American coast, he recalled, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we, and perhaps the British possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. The implication was devastating. Germany, with its vaunted scientific and military prowess, was behind. Not just behind, but catastrophically so. The cutting-edge technology they believed to be their exclusive domain was, for America, merely routine. It was then, von Stobern confessed, the weight of the realization still palpable decades later. I first suspected that Germany had already lost the war. This wasn't just about bombs or tanks. It was about a fundamental, systemic, technological, and industrial inferiority that no amount of fighting spirit could overcome. August 2, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. The first direct sight of America delivered a final pulverizing blow to the last remnants of Nazi propaganda regarding American industrial weakness. The sheer scale was beyond comprehension. The Norfolk base sprawled across an astonishing 4,300 acres, its docks stretching for miles, a testament to raw, unrestrained power. Giant cranes, a dizzying array of them, were loading and unloading dozens of ships simultaneously, a ballet of mechanized efficiency. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg, a major European industrial hub, managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber, a factory worker from the Ruhr before his conscription, meticulously counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading or unloading. His observations, carefully recorded in his secret diary, highlighted the technological chasm. Each crane, he noted, lifted loads that would have required a dozen men and horses in Germany, a stark comparison between muscle and machine. They moved with electric power, smoothly, continuously, without the choking coal smoke that defined and often marred Germany's industrial cities. This was industry, reinvented and operating at a scale that defied their every expectation. As the prisoners were formed into columns for the march to the waiting trains, they passed parking lots. What they saw there was yet another unexpected jolt to their worldview. Hundreds of civilian automobiles belonging to ordinary dock workers. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a coveted privilege, largely restricted to the wealthy and the party elite. The Volkswagen, or people's car, promised to the German people with much fanfare since 1934, remained largely a propaganda dream, with fewer than 1,000 ever actually delivered to civilians. Here, in America, ordinary laborers simply drove to work in their own cars. This wasn't just a sign of wealth. It was a symbol of widespread, democratic prosperity, utterly alien to the stratified, scarcity-driven society they had left behind. But nothing, absolutely nothing, truly prepared them for the trains themselves. These were not the grim, utilitarian boxcars, nor the notorious 40 and 8 wagons, designed to carry 40 men or 8 horses, that had transported German troops across the length and breadth of conquered Europe. These were full passenger coaches, luxurious Pullman cars with padded seats that converted into comfortable sleeping berths. There were dining cars, complete with white tablecloths and gleaming silver cutlery, and observation cars offering panoramic windows for viewing the passing landscape. Hedman Radke, still reeling from the succession of shocks, aptly summarized the experience. We boarded like tourists, not prisoners. The American guards themselves seemed almost embarrassed by the opulence. One sergeant, caught in the awkwardness of the situation, even apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly in their car. Air conditioning. In August. The prisoners had believed such a luxury existed only in the private, heavily fortified train of Adolf Hitler himself. The idea that a basic comfort like air conditioning was expected for ordinary citizens, let alone enemy prisoners, was utterly beyond their comprehension. The 3-day train journey from Norfolk, Virginia, to the sprawling prisoner-of-war camps of Texas and Oklahoma would, in retrospect, prove even more destructive to Nazi ideology than any single military defeat. It was a forced, immersive tour of an America that couldn't possibly exist according to everything they had been meticulously told. As the trains rolled through the heart of Virginia, the prisoners pressed their faces against the windows, their eyes wide with disbelief. Every small town, from Martinsville to Danville to Greensboro, blazed with illumination. These were communities that, in Germany, would have been lucky to possess a single electric street lamp. Yet here they displayed brightly lit shop windows, electric signs, and houses with lights burning in multiple rooms, radiating an almost defiant abundance. The trains passed factories running night shifts, their windows glowing like beacons of ceaseless production, their parking lots full even at midnight. Obergefreiter Müller, whose father was a devout Nazi Party bloc leader in Hamburg, wrote in a letter discovered in 1987, a raw testament to his shaken beliefs. We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Everyone had more electricity than all of Hamburg. When he challenged the guards, expressing his disbelief, they merely shrugged, stating this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. Müller, in his letter, wrote, "I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said we would see." And see they did. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train momentarily stopped for water and coal. The prisoners watched, transfixed, as American railway workers performed in a mere 30 minutes what would have taken at least 2 hours in Germany. Automated coal loaders, electric water pumps, mechanized lubrication systems. Every aspect of the operation demonstrated a technological superiority that bordered on the futuristic. More disturbing still, for men steeped in a rigid class structure, was the casual wealth of the workers themselves. They wore sturdy leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola from glass bottles and, to the prisoners' horror, casually threw the empties into bins without a second thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished, a profligate waste of a precious commodity. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an electrical engineer from Siemens before the war, a man keenly attuned to resource management, calculated that the single railway yard they stopped in used more electricity in 1 hour than his entire district in Berlin consumed in a day. The waste was magnificent, he wrote. They left lights burning in empty buildings. Electric fans ran in vacant rooms. It was the carelessness of infinite resource. This wasn't just inefficiency. It was a profound cultural difference, born of a reality of abundance that simply could not exist in their world. As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, the prisoners encountered the full, unbridled force of American industrial power, a spectacle of manufacturing might on a scale they had never imagined. Through the windows, they watched endless factories roll by, each one larger than anything most had ever seen in Germany. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee, a sprawling titan, stretched for 3 miles along the river, its electric furnaces consuming an astonishing 175,000 kilowatts of power. More, they were told, than the entire city of Munich, a major industrial center in Germany. Near Louisville, the trains slowed as they passed the Rubbertown complex, a testament to American wartime ingenuity, where synthetic rubber plants had sprung from empty fields in a mere 18 months. Here, 4 massive facilities, each employing thousands of workers, were collectively producing an astounding 800,000 tons of synthetic rubber annually. This number was particularly devastating for the prisoners, as Germany, despite having invented the synthetic rubber process, had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood the implications immediately. In a post-war interview, he recalled, "I knew those plants. I could see the distillation columns, the catalytic crackers. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country. The realization was chilling. Germany wasn't just falling behind. It was utterly outmatched in the fundamental industrial sinews of war. The trains then passed Ford's legendary Willow Run plant outside Detroit, a gargantuan facility visible from miles away, a veritable city of industry. This single factory, built in an astonishing 9 months, was producing a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. At peak production, 42,000 workers assembled bombers from 550,000 parts manufactured by 1,500 subcontractors across the nation. The plant itself consumed 5 million square feet of floor space and used more electricity than the entire German city of Cologne. Hauptmann Wehrli, a Luftwaffe pilot shot down over Tunisia, pressed his face against the window as they passed, his professional eye instantly recognizing the implications. He counted 17 B-24s in various stages of completion visible from the train. We had been told American planes were inferior, hastily built, would fall apart in combat. He later reflected, the propaganda peeling away layer by layer. But I could see the precision of the assembly lines, the quality of the construction. These were not inferior aircraft. They were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. The sheer velocity of American production wasn't just impressive. It fundamentally altered their understanding of what was humanly achievable. The deeper the trains penetrated into America's heartland, the more complete became the destruction of Nazi mythology. In St. Louis, they crossed the mighty Mississippi River on the Eads Bridge, a feat of engineering. Below them, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. The prisoners could see grain elevators stretching along both banks, monstrous silos, each one holding enough wheat to feed a German city for months. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, a farmer's son from Bavaria, whose family likely struggled with meager harvests, wrote in his diary with a sense of utter bewilderment. The Americans transport food as we transport ammunition, in endless quantities without concern for loss. He watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed his entire village for 5 years. The crane operator, a symbol of this overwhelming abundance, was casually eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration. This wasn't just about food. It was about the staggering contrast between a nation perpetually on the brink of famine and a nation whose agricultural output was so immense it defied belief. In Kansas City, the train stopped at a massive stockyard where tens of thousands of cattle waited for slaughter. The pungent, almost overwhelming smell of meat-packing plants filled the air for miles around. A scent that for German POWs, who had subsisted on a paltry 200 grams of meat per week in Africa, and only then if they were lucky, was an intoxicating, almost hallucinatory experience. They watched American workers eating thick beef sandwiches during their lunch break. Gefreiter Paul Fischer, in his diary, grappled with the inadequacy of language to describe the scene. They ate meat like we ate bread, he wrote, then corrected himself. No, that's wrong. They ate meat like we wished we could eat bread. The sheer casualness of it was the most shocking. A guard, observing their hungry stares, bought them hamburgers from a stand near the station. Meat, cheese, vegetables on white bread for 15 cents. He bought 20 of them without thinking, paying with a single dollar bill. This was not special, Fisher noted, the realization sinking in. This was their normal food. This wasn't a special concession. It was the everyday reality of a working-class American, a standard of living so vastly superior to anything they knew that it redefined their concept of normal. The arrival at the camps themselves, far from being a respite, provided the next profound level of cognitive demolition. Camp Hearn, Texas, was a marvel of rapid construction, built in just 4 months. It housed between 3,000 and 4,800 prisoners in conditions that, astonishingly, exceeded what most of them had known as civilians in Germany. They found wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat, amenities that were often considered luxuries even in urban Germany, let alone for a rural populace. Each building, they noted, was constructed with more lumber than entire German villages possessed, highlighting the vast material resources available to the Americans. The camp hospital astounded the medical personnel among the prisoners. Oberstleutnant Dr. Friedrich Bauer, chief surgeon of the 164th Light Division, a highly trained professional, found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. He observed X-ray machines, surgical equipment, and pharmaceutical supplies that had been completely unavailable in Germany since 1941. All of this, he realized, was standard provision for enemy prisoners. They had penicillin, Dr. Bauer would later testify, recounting his astonishment, this miracle drug that we had only heard rumors about. And not only did they have it, but they used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. The bitter irony was not lost on him. German soldiers were dying for want of basic sulfa drugs, and the Americans were giving us their most advanced medicine without hesitation. This wasn't just medical care. It was a demonstration of scientific advancement and humanitarian values utterly alien to the Nazi ideology of racial purity and selective care. The camp kitchen became yet another inadvertent classroom in American prosperity and efficiency. Prisoners assigned to cooking duties discovered walk-in refrigerators overflowing with fresh produce, electric mixers, automated dishwashers, and gas ranges that could prepare meals for 5,000 men with ease. The daily ration included fresh milk, eggs, generous portions of meat, abundant vegetables, and endless supplies of white bread, quantities and varieties that German civilians hadn't seen since before 1939. Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former hotel chef from Munich, recorded his profound shock. Today, we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. He learned that American regulations required preparing 10% more food than needed to ensure every prisoner received full rations, and the surplus was simply discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage, he wrote, the act a searing indictment of the scarcity that defined his homeland. This wasn't just about food. It was about an economic system so productive, so abundant, that it could afford to casually discard what entire nations yearned for, a visible, tangible symbol of overwhelming power. By September 1943, a burgeoning labor shortage in American agriculture, exacerbated by millions of men serving in the military, led to the widespread employment of POWs in fields and factories across the country. This decision, born of pragmatic necessity, would prove to be one of the most destructive forces against Nazi ideology, far more effective than any propaganda program could have ever achieved. Groups of prisoners were trucked daily to work sites, traveling freely through the American heartland, without blindfolds or restricted routes. They saw everything, unvarnished and undeniable. The endless rolling fields of corn and wheat stretching to the horizon. The factories running 3 shifts, day and night, their relentless productivity evident. The shops overflowing with goods that were rationed or unavailable in Germany. The parking lots, once again, full of cars, not just a few, but hundreds, thousands. And the houses, simple and comfortable, often with refrigerators and radios, symbols of everyday American life. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang watched, mesmerized, as a single machine processed more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could have handled in a month, using traditional, labor-intensive methods. The gin, he learned, was powered by electricity from the Colorado River Authority, part of a vast rural electrification program that had brought the power to an astounding 90% of Texas farms by 1943. The farmer who owned the gin, Lang recorded, was nobody special. He wasn't aristocracy, not a party member, just a farmer. Yet this ordinary farmer had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a powerful tractor. His workers, including Negroes, a term used by Lang reflecting his prejudiced upbringing, but whose presence in positions of skilled labor further challenged Nazi racial hierarchies, ate lunch from boxes containing more food than German workers received in a week. And this was normal, Lang concluded, the weight of the realization pressing down on him. Every farm we passed was the same. This wasn't a show, it was the everyday reality of American agricultural prosperity, a model of decentralized, technologically advanced abundance. In Nebraska, prisoners worked in sprawling sugar beet fields, witnessing agricultural mechanization that defied their comprehension. A single combine harvester, they learned, could do the work of 100 men. The fields stretched to the horizon, each one larger than entire German counties. The farmers, in casual conversation, spoke of yields that would have been fantasy in Germany. 60 bushels of wheat per acre, compared to Germany's meager 30 on its very best land. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann, working on a farm outside Scottsbluff, wrote of a particularly poignant encounter. The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When Hoffman, in his incredulity, mentioned this, the boy simply laughed, saying it wasn't even a particularly good tractor, and that his father was waiting for a new model from John Deere that would be even better. This casual, almost dismissive attitude toward such wealth was a stark, brutal revelation about the true gap in living standards, and indeed, national capacity. Perhaps the most devastating revelations came to those prisoners who worked near, or astonishingly, even in American factories. While Geneva Convention rules wisely prohibited direct war production work for prisoners, POWs could be employed in industries that freed American workers for military production. This seemingly minor technicality allowed thousands of German prisoners to witness American industrial capacity firsthand, up close and personal, leaving an indelible mark. At a Campbell soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched production lines that processed more tomatoes in a single day than most German factories, with all their efforts, could handle in a month. The facility operated with a skeleton crew of women and elderly men, as most young, able-bodied workers were serving in the military. Yet, astonishingly, production exceeded peacetime levels. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner, who had worked in a German food processing plant before the war, meticulously documented the experience. Everything was automated, he wrote, awe and disbelief mingling in his words. Electric conveyor belts, automatic filling machines, steam cookers that processed hundreds of cans simultaneously. He observed one elderly woman, seemingly effortlessly, monitoring controls that managed what would have required 50 workers in Germany, and she did this while listening to a radio and drinking coffee, a picture of relaxed efficiency that was utterly alien to the strenuous, often grim pace of German wartime production. Near Detroit, prisoners unloading coal at a power plant gained tantalizing, often overwhelming glimpses of the automotive industry's astounding conversion to war production. The immense River Rouge complex, sprawling and powerful, was visible across the water, a monument to American industrial might. It employed 100,000 workers, tirelessly producing jeeps, aircraft engines, and tanks. The plant itself consumed an incredible 5 million kilowatts of electricity daily, more than the entire city of Hamburg. We could see the parking lots, wrote Obergefreiter Franz Kellner, his words conveying a lingering sense of shock. Thousands of cars belonging to workers. Workers in Germany? Even our officers rarely owned cars. He recounted how the guard, perhaps enjoying the German prisoners' incredulity, told them, many workers owned 2 cars, one for work, one for family use. Kellner's reaction was typical. We thought he was mocking us. The vastness of this individual prosperity, this freedom of movement and ownership for the ordinary worker, was simply beyond the conceptual framework of men from a rigidly controlled, resource-scarce society. By the winter of 1943, the cumulative, relentless impact of these observations was producing what American intelligence officers, meticulously monitoring the prisoners, termed ideological collapse syndrome among the captives. The Special Projects Division, a secret re-education program run by the Provost Marshal General's Office, began documenting increasing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. The thirst for alternative information was growing exponentially. Major Paul Neuland, a member of the monitoring team, reported in December 1943 with a sense of quiet triumph. The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis, those who had clung fiercely to their ideology, had become quiet. While they might still maintain a residual loyalty to Germany, they no longer speak of victory. Crucially, many openly question what they were told about America. The camp newspapers, produced by the prisoners themselves and initially filled with defiant nationalism, began reflecting this profound transformation. Der Ruf, the Call, published at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, gradually shifted its editorial stance from staunchly nationalistic, pro-Nazi rhetoric to discussions of democracy, economic systems, and the daunting challenges of post-war reconstruction. The editors, carefully selected anti-Nazi prisoners, found their audience increasingly receptive, hungry for new ideas and an alternative vision. Lieutenant Hermann Goetz, captured with the 10th Panzer Division, articulated this shift in a letter that passed American censors. We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, controlled by Jews, incapable of military prowess. His daily experience, however, had completely contradicted this. Every day I am here, I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals. The direct, irrefutable evidence of their own eyes had shattered a lifetime of ideological conditioning. The most devastating blow to Nazi ideology, however, came from an utterly unexpected source: the treatment of Italian prisoners after Italy's surrender in September 1943. Italian POWs who agreed to cooperate with the Allied forces were formed into Italian service units. They were given markedly better quarters, increased pay, and significantly more freedom within the camps and surrounding communities. German prisoners watched their former allies working alongside Americans, eating in American restaurants, and, in some astonishing instances, even dating American women. Headman Friedrich Schultz expressed the bitter irony and profound psychological impact of this in his diary. The Italians betrayed us, yet they are treated better than we treated them as allies. The contrast was stark. They work freely, earn money, send packages home. The Americans show them no hatred. This democratic system, which they had been taught to despise as weak and decadent, now appeared to possess a moral dimension far superior to their own. This democracy we were taught to despise appears more honorable than our own system, Schultz conceded, a grudging acknowledgment of a truth that undermined everything he had believed. Christmas 1943 provided perhaps the most profound psychological impact, a moment that transcended ideology and touched the very humanity of the prisoners. American organizations, churches, and civic groups, with astonishing generosity, sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German POWs, their declared enemies, men who had been actively trying to kill American soldiers just months earlier. Each package contained simple yet precious items: cigarettes, candy, toiletries, and games. Local communities, driven by genuine Christian charity, even invited prisoners to Christmas dinners, though regulations prevented most from accepting. At Camp Hearn, Texas, the local Methodist church choir performed Christmas carols in German for the prisoners, a gesture of profound goodwill. Women from Hearn sent in homemade cookies and cakes, while Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This overwhelming, unsolicited kindness toward enemies shattered the final brittle remnants of Nazi racial theory, which taught that Americans were soft, decadent, and racially inferior. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother had died in the devastating bombing of Hamburg, expressed the deep confusion and dawning realization. They know we are their enemies. Many have sons and husbands fighting against our armies, yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness. He grappled with the implications. What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power. It was a demonstration of strength, not weakness, rooted in confidence and compassion rather than hatred and fear. The Christmas feast itself, served to the prisoners, defied all comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream. Vast quantities of food that Germany hadn't seen since before the First World War. The prisoners ate until they were literally sick, unable to comprehend such resources being lavished on enemies. "We ate like kings," wrote Feldwebel Hansa. "Better than German generals eat, better than party leaders." And, adding another layer of bewildering reality, this was not special. The guards assured them this was a normal American Christmas dinner, that every American family was eating the same meal. The implications were staggering, the logical conclusion inescapable. If they can feed prisoners this way, what must their own soldiers eat? The boundless generosity, paired with the overwhelming evidence of material abundance, signaled an enemy unlike any they had been prepared to face. By early 1944, the American re-education program, now more formalized, had gained significant traction. Over 40,000 German prisoners were voluntarily enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and sciences, disciplines often neglected or distorted in Nazi Germany. The prestigious University of Chicago even provided correspondence courses, while Stanford University sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics directly to the camps. The thirst for knowledge, for understanding this bewildering new reality, was insatiable. Prisoners who had been told Americans were uncultured barbarians discovered libraries with millions of books, universities that welcomed all social classes, a stark contrast to Germany's rigid system, and scientific research that led the world. They read American newspapers freely, comparing multiple viewpoints and engaging in open debate, a fundamental aspect of a free society that was utterly impossible in Nazi Germany, where dissent meant death. Hauptmann Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a brilliant physicist conscripted from the renowned Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, attended lectures on atomic physics at Camp Shelby. He later wrote of his profound experience. American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They spoke of science as universal, belonging to all humanity. This was a stark contrast to the Nazi regime's attempts to Aryanize science. Thus, von Braun was particularly struck by their scientific lead. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This profound generosity of spirit, this open sharing of knowledge with those who sought to destroy them, was simply incomprehensible to minds shaped by the narrow, vindictive ideology of Nazism. It demonstrated a confidence in truth and progress that transcended national animosity. The camp theaters showed American films, not crude propaganda reels, but regular Hollywood productions. Prisoners watched Gone with the Wind, a depiction of American defeat and recovery, and found it resonated deeply with their own situation of military collapse. They saw The Grapes of Wrath, amazed that Americans would show such self-criticism, such raw depiction of their own societal problems, even to their enemies. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer, in his diary, expressed his astonishment. They hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures, their conflicts. Yet this honesty makes them stronger, not weaker. He starkly contrasted it with his own regime. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic. This was a revelation about the true source of democratic strength. Not suppression, but transparency and open discourse. Spring 1944 brought expanded prisoner labor programs as American production reached its absolute peak, a cascade of industrial output that defied all previous historical benchmarks. German POWs worked in canneries, mills, and fabrication plants, directly witnessing the full, overwhelming might of American industrial capacity. The numbers, translated into tangible output, told a story that no propaganda, however sophisticated, could possibly counter. At the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans, prisoners unloaded steel that would become landing craft for the D-Day invasion. They watched as workers assembled an astonishing 700 boats per month, each one requiring 20,000 parts. The factory employed 20,000 workers, including thousands of women who operated cranes, welded hulls, and managed complex production lines. A diverse workforce that shattered Nazi notions of racial and gender roles in industry. Stabsfeldwebel Kurt Zimmermann observed this phenomenon with a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. Women doing men's work, Negroes operating complex machinery, teenagers running drilling equipment. Everything we were told was impossible in a democracy. Yet production never stopped. He noted the relentless pace. 3 shifts, 24 hours, 7 days a week. They produced more boats in a month than our entire Navy built in a year. It was a humbling, sobering experience for men who had been taught that their nation was the industrial and organizational leader of the world. At Republic Steel in Ohio, prisoners witnessed the daily production of 10,000 tons of steel. The blast furnaces ran continuously, fed by endless trains of iron ore from Minnesota and coal from Pennsylvania. The scale defied German comprehension. This single plant produced more steel than the entire Ruhr industrial region, Germany's industrial heartland at its peak. Oberwachtmeister Paul Hartmann, who had worked at the famed Krupp Works before the war, articulated the profound shock. I worked at Krupp before the war. I thought I understood industrial production, but this was beyond imagination. He recounted the sheer scale of waste. They wasted more steel in spillage than we could produce. And the paradox of abundance. The workers complained about overtime while producing quantities we couldn't achieve with slave labor and double shifts. The industrial output wasn't just immense, it was effortless, almost casual in its relentless scale. The summer 1944 harvest provided the final, conclusive demolition of Nazi propaganda about American agricultural weakness. German prisoners worked across the Midwest, witnessing agricultural production that genuinely could feed the world. In Kansas, they watched wheat harvests where single farms produced more grain than entire German provinces. Combines, massive and efficient, moved across fields like ships across an ocean of gold, each one harvesting 100 acres per day. The grain elevators they filled could hold more wheat than Germany imported in an entire year. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, a farmer from East Prussia, wrote with a sense of utter awe. One American farmer with machinery does the work of 100 German farmers. He was shown aerial photographs of the wheat fields, thousands of square miles of grain. The accompanying explanation was devastating. They could lose half their harvest and still have more than all of Europe combined. In California's Central Valley, prisoners picked fruit in orchards that stretched beyond the horizon, a seemingly endless bounty. They watched, horrified and bewildered, as perfectly good fruit was discarded for minor blemishes. Fruit that would have been treasured and carefully rationed in Germany. Even more shocking, entire crops were sometimes plowed under to maintain prices, a concept that caused deep psychological breakdown among prisoners from hunger-ravaged Germany. They destroyed food to keep prices stable, wrote Gefreiter Otto Schulz, the words dripping with incredulity and despair. Mountains of oranges bulldozed into pits because they had too many. The prisoners, desperate, begged to be allowed to send the discarded food to Germany, to their starving families. The guards, while sympathetic, explained it was impossible. The waste was not mere inefficiency. It was, paradoxically, strategic proof of unlimited resources, a declaration of superabundance that was more powerful than any weapon. Then came June 6, 1944. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, German prisoners experienced their final, undeniable ideological collapse. The sheer scale of the operation, 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave, demonstrated an American organizational capacity beyond Nazi Germany's wildest, most ambitious dreams. Prisoners at Camp Shelby watched newsreels of the invasion within days, seeing the endless streams of ships, the artificial harbors, Mulberry, and the incredible supply system that delivered 15,000 tons daily across open beaches. They watched their homeland, already battered and reeling, being crushed by the very nation they had been told was too weak, too decadent to fight. Unteroffizier Friedrich von Tauben encapsulated the despair. We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. The brutal truth was laid bare. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources. Throughout their captivity, German prisoners experienced something that challenged Nazi ideology even more profoundly than America's material wealth: American humanity. Despite relentless propaganda depicting Americans as weak, sentimental, and ultimately selfish, the POWs discovered a people secure enough in their strength to show mercy and compassion. When Gefreiter Hans Miller's son died in the brutal Hamburg bombing raids, the American camp commander personally delivered the Red Cross message and offered his sincere condolences, a gesture unimaginable from their own leadership. When Lieutenant Paul Fischer's wife wrote that she was struggling desperately to feed their children in war-torn Germany, American church groups, without hesitation, sent food packages directly to her in Germany. These were enemy civilians, in a nation America was actively bombing, yet they received aid. They separated the German people from the Nazi regime, wrote Hedman Otto. They said they were fighting Hitler, not Germans. This distinction, which had initially seemed like cynical propaganda, proved genuinely true. They prepared us to rebuild Germany after the war, not to destroy it. This was a profound and lasting lesson in the difference between fighting a regime and hating a people. The medical treatment prisoners received particularly affected them. German doctors, working alongside American medical staff, learned new techniques and gained access to advanced equipment. Prisoners received operations that would have been available only to the elite in Germany. Mental health treatment, virtually unknown and stigmatized in the Wehrmacht, was compassionately provided to traumatized soldiers. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, the chief surgeon, observed, "They treated attempted suicides with counseling, not punishment. Prisoners with mental breakdowns received therapy, not beatings." This deep, unexpected humanity toward enemies revealed a strength that they had never understood: the confidence of true power. It was a power rooted in empathy and a respect for human dignity, not just military might. By March 1945, the secret re-education program, now operating at full scale, had produced remarkable results. Over 25,000 prisoners had voluntarily signed up for democracy courses. The camp newspapers, once bastions of Nazi dogma, now published articles about constitutional government, free markets, and civil rights. Discussion groups vigorously debated Germany's future after the war. The program's success exceeded all expectations. Prisoners who had arrived as fanatical Nazis were writing insightful essays about democratic reconstruction. Officers who had sworn solemn oaths of loyalty to Hitler were now planning how to implement American agricultural methods in post-war Germany. We became missionaries for democracy, admitted Oberleutnant Hermann Göring, no relation to the Reich Marshal, in a 1975 interview. Not through coercion or propaganda, but through observation. We saw it work. We saw ordinary people living better than German aristocracy. We wanted that for Germany. The transformation was so complete that American authorities even worried about prisoners being too enthusiastic about American ways. Some requested to stay in America after the war. Others married American women they met through prison correspondence programs. Thousands would eventually immigrate to America in the 1950s, becoming citizens of the nation they once fought. April 1945 brought the final horrifying revelation. As American forces liberated concentration camps in Germany, the gruesome footage was shown to German POWs. Many initially refused to believe it, claiming it was insidious propaganda designed to break their spirits. But the evidence was overwhelming, relentless, and undeniable. Testimony from American soldiers, harrowing photographs, unedited newsreels, and, eventually, letters from Germany confirming the sheer, unimaginable horror. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who had maintained some measure of pride in German honor, even amidst military defeat, now faced the complete moral collapse of their nation. Everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed for, was not just defeated. It was revealed to be unspeakably evil. Headman Walter Schmidt wrote one of the most eloquent and heartbreaking summaries. We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We found that we were the barbarians. The ultimate, bitter irony was profound. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant. As the war finally ended in May 1945, German POWs faced repatriation with a complex, often conflicted mix of emotions. They had witnessed an America that contradicted every single thing they had been taught and believed. They had eaten better as prisoners than they ever had as soldiers. They had been treated with more dignity and humanity by their enemies than by their own government. The last months of their captivity were spent not in punitive isolation, but in preparation for their return to a Germany divided, destroyed, and destitute. American authorities provided vocational training, agricultural education, and crucial political instruction. Prisoners learned about the Marshall Plan even before it was publicly announced, understanding that America planned to rebuild rather than punish Germany, a stark contrast to the Treaty of Versailles. They prepared us to rebuild our country, wrote Oberst Friedrich von Tauben. They gave us skills, knowledge, hope. They transformed defeated soldiers into future citizens. This astonishing generosity from victors toward their former enemies was utterly incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi vindictiveness and the dogma of unconditional surrender and retribution. Between 1945 and 1946, 683 German POWs were repatriated from American camps. They returned to a nation in ruins, but they carried with them something precious and transformative, invaluable knowledge of how a democratic, industrial society functioned. These German POWs, who had experienced American prosperity firsthand, became unwitting, yet profoundly effective, agents of transformation in post-war Germany. They had seen industrial efficiency on an unprecedented scale, agricultural productivity that could feed continents, and democratic prosperity that nurtured its citizens rather than exploiting them. They knew that Reconstruction was not merely a dream, but a tangible possibility, because they had personally witnessed a society that had achieved it, seemingly effortlessly. Many former POWs, armed with this unique insight and a transformed worldview, rose to prominence in West Germany's miraculous reconstruction. Hans Kroll, a prisoner at Camp Shelby, went on to become West German ambassador to the United States, a living embodiment of the transformation. Walter Hallstein, who taught classes at Camp Co., became president of the European Commission, shaping the future of Europe. Rüdiger von Fritsch, held at Camp Herne, served as German permanent representative to the United Nations. Eduard Ackermann, a prisoner at Fort Robinson, became a leading figure in German agricultural reform, directly applying lessons learned in American fields. They brought American methods to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic ideals to German politics. The economic miracle of the 1950s, which rebuilt West Germany into a thriving democratic nation, was built, in no small part, on knowledge and a changed mindset gained in American prison camps. We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest, Hans Kroll wrote in his memoirs. We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength, that treating workers well increased production. These lessons learned as prisoners shaped the new Germany. Historians have widely hailed the German POW experience in America as one of the most successful re-education programs in history. Without overt coercion and without traditional heavy-handed propaganda, the overwhelming reality of American industrial might and the inherent values of its democracy converted hardened Nazis into future democratic citizens. The program succeeded precisely because it relied not on words alone, but on irrefutable observation. Prisoners saw American society functioning at peak efficiency, while, crucially, treating even its enemies with dignity. They witnessed industrial capacity that made German production, once vaunted, look primitive by comparison. They experienced a standard of living that exposed Nazi promises as hollow, cruel fantasies. Dr. Arnold Kramer, the leading historian of German POWs in America, concluded unequivocally, America won the propaganda war not through clever messages, but through sheer reality. Every full meal, every electric light, every working toilet was an argument against Nazism. The POWs were converted by prosperity. The statistics powerfully support this assessment. Of the 371,683 German POWs held in America, fewer than 1% attempted escape, with only 2,222 total attempts recorded, and 0 successful permanent escapes. Most escapees were recaptured within 24 hours, and, crucially, no American civilians were harmed by escaped POWs. Post-war surveys showed that an astonishing 95% rated their treatment as good or excellent. Most remarkably, thousands maintained correspondence with American families for decades after the war, a testament to the genuine connections formed. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of the war's end, surviving German POWs held a reunion in Austin, Texas. Over 500 former prisoners returned to America, many bringing their families, eager to show them where their profound transformation had begun. Former Obergefreiter Hans Vea, who had been held at Fort Robinson, Nebraska, and later returned to become a physician in Georgetown, Maine, spoke at the reunion, reflecting on the profound impact. Life in the camps was a vast improvement for many of us who had grown up in cold water flats in Germany. We discovered running water, central heating, and abundant food. But more than that, we discovered dignity. Former Stabsfeld Weeble Kurt Meir, who had worked on farms in Iowa, added, "The farmers treated us not as enemies, but as young men far from home. They shared their meals, their knowledge, sometimes their homes. This humanity from people whose sons were fighting against us, this changed us forever." At that emotional 1985 reunion dinner, former Oberst Hermann Goetz, then 78 years old, delivered a keynote address that perfectly captured the essence of their transformation. "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie," he declared, his voice filled with the weight of history. "We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth." His words echoed with the lessons of decades. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production. We saw farmers who produced food for the world, workers who built the tools of victory, and citizens who treated enemies with dignity. He concluded with a powerful testament. "We learned that America's true weapon was not its bombs or tanks, but its inexhaustible capacity for creation and its unshakable confidence." We returned to Germany with a mission to build a society that could create rather than destroy, that could prosper through peace rather than war. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. We who came as conquerors left as students. To America, from your former enemies, now your friends. Thank you for showing us the way. The auditorium erupted in a standing ovation. Americans and Germans together. Former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed utterly impossible when those first trains, carrying broken warriors of the Third Reich, rolled into Texas in June 1943. The magnitude of the German POW experience in America can be measured not just in powerful anecdotes, but in stark statistics that reveal both the scale of the operation and its remarkable success. The camp infrastructure was vast. Over 500 camps spread across 45 states, every state except Nevada, North Dakota, and Vermont, with 175 main camps and 325 branch camps, designed to house anywhere from 250 to 12,000 prisoners each. Construction was completed on average in a staggering 90 days per camp. The prisoner population peaked at 371,683 German POWs, part of a total 425,171 Axis prisoners. In 1943, an average of 20,000 new arrivals landed monthly, a number that swelled to 30,000 monthly after D-Day, and 60,000 monthly in the final, desperate months of the war. Their labor contribution was immense. 14 million man-days of agricultural labor, 100 million board feet of lumber processed, generating an estimated $230 million in labor value, in 1940s dollars, at an 80-cent daily wage per prisoner. Prisoners filled critical labor shortages in 46 states, keeping the American economy humming. And the escape statistics, as noted, remained incredibly low, a testament to contentment and transformation. Educationally, over 40,000 prisoners enrolled in courses, 135 camp newspapers were published, 30,000 took English classes, 15,000 received vocational training, and 8,000 engaged in university correspondence courses. Post-war, approximately 5,000 former POWs immigrated to the U.S., and over 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families for an average of 31 years. Many returning as tourists or business partners. The ultimate assessment. 95% rated treatment as good or excellent. 74% believed captivity positively changed their worldview. 61% expressed interest in learning about democracy, and, remarkably, less than 10 maintained strong Nazi beliefs by 1945. The German POWs who experienced America's industrial might didn't just witness history, they were transformed by it. Their captivity became a profound education. Their military defeat became an ideological enlightenment, and their imprisonment became a liberation from the ideological chains of Nazism. In the end, America's greatest victory was not solely on the battlefield, but within the confines of these prison camps, where the overwhelming, undeniable evidence of democratic prosperity accomplished what armies and propaganda alone could not: the complete internal transformation of enemy minds. The POWs had arrived believing in German superiority and American weakness, a narrative meticulously crafted by their totalitarian regime. They left knowing a profound truth. American industrial might was not just overwhelming, it was incomprehensible to minds shaped by scarcity and tyranny. The trains that had brought them into captivity in 1943 had carried hardened warriors of the Third Reich. The ships that returned them to Germany in 1946 carried potential architects of democracy. They had seen the future, and it worked. Their story stands as a powerful testament to a profound truth. The most potent weapon in America's arsenal was not merely its military might, its bombs or its tanks, but the simple, overwhelming, and visible evidence of a free society's capacity to create unparalleled abundance and to uphold human dignity. The German POWs were initially stunned by America's industrial might, but more enduringly, they were converted by it. In their transformation lay the vital seeds of Europe's post-war redemption and the final moral defeat of the Nazi dream. They returned to Germany not as defeated enemies, but as compelling witnesses to what free societies could achieve. The economic miracle that transformed West Germany in the 1950s was built on foundations laid in American prison camps, where enemy soldiers learned that true prosperity came not from conquest, but from freedom, not from racial superiority, but from human dignity, and not from totalitarian control, but from democratic cooperation. The German POWs had arrived in America expecting to find a weak, divided nation on the verge of collapse. Instead, they discovered an industrial colossus of seemingly unlimited power and a surprising, disarming humanity. They had come as prisoners of war, but left as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy at its absolute peak, a vision of what a truly free, productive society could be. In their awe at American abundance and generosity lay the psychological seeds of the Atlantic Alliance, the monumental Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Germany. They had seen America, and they would never be the same. Their children would grow up in a democratic Germany allied with the United States, a partnership built on the profound transformation that began when the 850 Africa Corps veterans stepped off that train in Mexia, Texas, and discovered that everything they believed was utterly, comprehensively wrong. The story of German POWs in America is ultimately a story of redemption through revelation. It proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration. Not through propaganda, but through prosperity, and not through hatred, but through humanity. The German soldiers who witnessed America's industrial might became the unwitting ambassadors of democracy, carrying back to their shattered homeland the seeds of transformation that would bloom into one of history's most successful reconstructions. Their remarkable journey from Nazi warriors to democratic citizens remains one of the most astonishing transformations in modern history, accomplished not through brute force, but through the overwhelming, tangible evidence of what free people could achieve when they worked together, united in purpose. In the end, that was America's secret weapon. Not just the ability to produce more tanks and planes than any nation in history, but the profound capacity to transform enemies into friends through the simple, undeniable power of example. The German POWs were stunned by America's industrial might, but, far more importantly, they were changed by it. And in that change lay the enduring foundation for a better, more peaceful world.